Anyway, all told, based on the footage we have available to us, I give Shredded Sports Science deadlifting technique What's up guys, Alec and Enkiri here, and it's time for another Form Check Friday. Today's gonna be fun, as it turns out, and you should all take a nice deep breath and have a seat before I say this, because it's probably gonna come as a great shock to many of you, and I don't need any of you guys collapsing where you stand and, hitting your head and coming down with concussion or anything like that, so sit down. But, as it turns out, James Linker, aka Shredded Sports Science, does actually lift after all. Or, he's at least lifted one time in his life, but I have video proof of it. Someone sent me a link to a video that old James posted back in April of 2018, so just over 2 years ago now, where he included some footage of himself performing a set of deadlifts. And they asked me if I would do an analysis of his lifting technique, and I figured, why the heck not? Now, I want to preface this whole thing by saying that I'm working with what I've got here. The available footage of this man lifting weights is pretty sparse. It's it's kind of like finding footage of Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, but just like with old Bigfoot, there does exist one single video. So like I said, I'm working with what I've got here. I'll make my analysis as fair as possible based on the available video footage. And when I'm done, if James finds my analysis to be unfair, then he's more than welcome to send me additional footage of him deadlifting or squatting or whatever he wants, and I'll be happy to review that additional footage as well and incorporate it into a new analysis video for you guys. But until then, we'll do the best with what we've got. So let's take a quick peek at James's deadlift and see how things are looking. Alright, so let's start with the setup. As far as stance goes, he's got his feet set a little bit outside of hip width with a mild degree of external rotation at the hips. The hips are set in a position slightly below the shoulders and well above the knees with a moderate amount of torso inclination present. The back appears to be set in a neutral and braced position. The grip is set a few inches away from the hips on both sides. Now, based on his build, we can see just by looking at everything that this stance isn't really ideal for him, and he would be better off with something a bit more compact. So my first recommendation would be to bring the stance in a little bit narrower. He's not a big guy. Structurally, his hips are not that wide, and they don't merit him taking the stance width that he's taking. And also, as we'll see in just a minute, he doesn't utilize any particular amount of leg involvement off the floor either. So all in all, the widest stance is simply unnecessary and likely counterproductive, as it does not really conform to his skeletal structure, and he's not making any use of its potential advantages anyway. Lastly, there is the issue of the grip width and its effect on the torso angle and the range of motion of the lift. He does have somewhat short arms relative to his legs, so his ideal set position based on his anthropometry is always going to involve at least a moderate degree of inclination at the torso. However, he exacerbates the issue by gripping the bar several inches outside of his hips, effectively artificially shortening the length of his arms even further and forcing him into a greater degree of torso inclination than necessary simply to be able to reach the bar, as well as increasing the overall range of motion of the lift. This is very inefficient. He probably started doing this because he found that the elbow on the supinated side got in the way of the thigh when he was setting up the lift, which is an issue exacerbated even further by the overly wide stance that he's chosen to take. However, when trying to optimize technical efficiency and leverage against the resistance, one should set the grip in a position where the arms are able to hang straight down, thereby maximizing their length, keeping the distance of the pole as short as possible from floor to lockout, and allowing the hips to be set as high as possible without an accompanying excessive degree of torso inclination, such that you are essentially just pulling a stiff-legged deadlift, like for example our friend is doing here. So then, in James's case, my final setup recommendations would be to first bring his stance in a couple inches to about hip width, or even a little bit narrower, just something more compact that more closely suits his build. He should then bring his grip in as well until his arms are hanging straight down and perpendicular with the floor when viewed from the front. And then he should use the weight of the bar as a counterbalance to pull his hips down just a tad bit lower, reducing the torso inclination slightly and allowing his shins to shift forward a little bit, thus engaging the legs and involving them in the pull. He appears to be set at an appropriate distance away from the barbell. However, his setup is pretty suboptimal overall, and he hasn't quite maneuvered his body into the ideal positions around the barbell. And so, as we'll see in just a minute, things are going to get pretty wonky when he starts the pull because of that. As he initiates the pull off the floor, the first thing you'll notice is that the hips pop up slightly from the set position. Not egregiously, but it should be noted and observed. Now, unfortunately, the footage that I have here to work with has been highly cut and edited, but we can still see that on the second and third reps, he actually initiates the pull with a really violent jerk against the barbell, and then he kind of goes into his actual pull immediately after that. Now, we don't see this on the first rep, but based on how reps 2 and 3 go, it's safe to say that he likely edited this bit out here, and I would say it's a fair assumption that this action was present on rep 1 as well. Now, this is a much more egregious error, and the problems with this are multifaceted. For one, you're putting a lot of stress on that bicep tendon on the supinated side. 2, it has a very jarring effect on the lower back while providing absolutely no benefit in return. And 3, it's likely to throw off your bar path or just create a tendency for an inconsistent bar path in general. And that's really kind of what we see here throughout this entire set. For example, on rep 1, the bar comes off the floor and immediately drifts backwards into his shins. On the second rep, the bar pops forward a little bit as soon as it comes off the ground before immediately drifting back into his shins once again. And then on the third rep, we really start to see some pronounced lateral shifting as well as rotation of the barbell as it's coming off the floor. So every rep in this one single set basically takes on a life of its own. There's no consistency in the technique, and so there's no real repeatability here in terms of the performance from rep to rep. And that's just not how crisp and efficient motor patterns are developed, and it's not how you maximize gains in the long run, whether your goal is strength, hypertrophy, power, or whatever. Now, as the bar comes off the ground, his body weight is also kind of shifting all over the place as well. First, we can see that his body weight actually pulls forward onto his toes. His shoulders are trying to get over top the bar, and it almost looks like his legs are trying to get involved in the thing as well, but they can't quite seem to do so. And then after that, he immediately does a total 180, and his weight shifts all the way back onto his heels. The bar goes rocketing back towards him, and we can see his toes actually come off the ground at this point as the bar is rising, and he even changes his foot position in the middle of the rep several times throughout the set. It's just, you know, it's kind of all over the place. His weight is moving from front to back and even side to side. There's never any balance or stability during the lift, and we're seeing compensation patterns start to take hold here as well. Not to mention, the whole damn thing just looks off. It's hard for me to pinpoint exactly what it is, and I'm sure it's a combination of factors, but the whole lift just has an odd look to it. And I think it's really just because he's using too much weight here given his level of skill at the lift. His motor pattern is not solid and it's not stable. His technique overall is simply not efficient, and he's working against his own body. Truly, the first thing he needs to do is simply dismantle the whole thing and start from the ground up. If he were my client, I would probably have him take at least 100 pounds off the bar to start things off. I can't say for sure based on this footage alone, but it looks like it's 135 kilos on the bar here, or roughly 297 pounds. So yeah, I would imagine we would be dropping the weight off pretty substantially from here to begin the real training. And from there, we would rebuild, and we would do so rather quickly, so long as we were able to maintain what I deem to be an adequately efficient level of technique with minimal breakdown and minimal compensation occurring. And it wouldn't be long before he was well exceeding the weight shown here in this video with much more efficient technique overall. He's not weak, but he's not well trained either, and he is severely lacking in the skill of lifting. I will say this though, at least he's using real weights. Honestly, there's not all that much to say about this phase because the lift was kind of broken before he even touched the bar. This phase is not any better or any worse, but it's just a reflection of what came before it. So you can't really judge it properly in this context. If we do look at it in isolation though, the biggest issue for me is just that the bar path is still kind of all over the place. It's hard to judge from this angle, but when he crosses the knees, there appears to be a tendency for him to have to reel the bar back into his thighs in order to lock it out, which appears most prominently here on the first rep. And the rest of the way is basically just more of the same as before. His weight is shifting from front to back and side to side. The lockout itself isn't terrible, except for some reason he again completely shifts all of his weight onto his heels, and his toes come off the ground every time he's standing there with the bar in his hand. So there's still no balance even once he's got the weight locked out. After the transition over the knees, he does demonstrate a pretty solid hip extension to move his body into a fully erect position at the top. At least on the first 2 reps he does. But then he exaggerates this unusual chest puffed out position at the lockout, which is simply unnecessary and indicates that he's likely overextending the lower back as well in the process. The glute engagement has also clearly diminished at that point. The lower back is trying to take over, and his posture while holding the bar is just kind of off in general at that point, likely due to a combination and culmination of all the previously aforementioned factors that got us here in the first place. Starting with the fact that the weight on the bar is simply too heavy for him to properly handle based on his skill level at the lift. His setup is highly suboptimal and inefficient. The pull is initiated in a rather dangerous and herky-jerky fashion. The motor pattern is not stable or consistent, and he simply needs to learn to control his hips better, especially as fatigue sets in. So in conclusion, like I said before, there's really just no balance in the system here. The lift is all over the place, the bar is all over the place, his body is all over the place, and he clearly just never really learned how to deadlift properly or efficiently, likely due to a lack of proper practice, a lack of understanding of the mechanics of the lift, a lack of understanding of how to properly program the lift for optimal progression, and an over-eagerness to load more weight onto the bar than he was ready for. You see errors like this time and time again with novice and intermediate trainees. And the best thing to do is simply overhaul the technique by dramatically reducing the weight on the bar and rebuilding the lift from the ground up. This would give us the opportunity to build a stable and efficient motor pattern that will allow him to make the best progress in the long term in regards to strength and hypertrophy, while also keeping undue stresses on areas such as the lower back to a minimum. It's taking 2 steps back to take 5 steps forward. James has plenty more strength potential than what we see in this video, but he will simply never ever reach that potential if he continues lifting and training like this. Anyway, all told, based on the footage we have available to us, I give Shredded Sports Science deadlifting technique 2.5 out of 5 stars. The lift has potential, and James has a decent strength base to work with here, but he has a lot of work to do if he wants to bring this lift up to snuff. And James, if you're watching this video, I'd be happy to help you out with taking your deadlift to the next level. We at least need to get you pulling more than my little sister. You do run a fitness channel after all, and she's just a chef. In my experience though, most guys your size can get over the 400 barrier pretty quickly with just a little bit of focused and smart work. And I think if you give it one earnest training cycle, we can probably get you there. You can check out my website if you're interested. Anyway, that's all I got for today, guys. Please be sure to like the video and don't forget to share it with James so he can improve his lifting technique and start making some big gains again. And if any of you guys are interested in online coaching or training programs, check out my website, www.enkirielitefitness.com. The feedback that I've gotten from my training templates has been pretty freaking immense so far. So you should definitely grab one of those if you've been considering it. Anyway, keep training hard and I'll catch you guys next time.